Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the No Matter What Club. I am so excited, like I am every week when I say I'm so excited. First and foremost, we have Jack and Mell, Executive Director and Program Director of No Matter What Recovery.
Hi, y'all.
And a very dear friend and colleague in the industry who we're honored and privileged to have here on the episode of No Matter What Club is TJ Woodward, the
one and only. Well, thank you so much.
But never lonely.
Never lonely, but the one and only. I like it. Trademark.
So, TJ, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you do and what you're doing in the industry? And
Well, my greatest passion as of late, like the last few years, is helping clinicians reignite passion and purpose for their work. I see so much burnout in our field, and for me, it really comes from, I'm hearkening back to when I started working in treatment in 2008, and I was working in a 48-bed facility, and I remember just seeing so much burnout, and the gates would open, and I would have this thought, if I thought there were 48 broken humans on the other side of this gate, and my job was to fix them, I'd be burnt out too.
Yeah.
So that's my greatest passion now, is creating spaces for clinicians or for healers to do their healing.
I love it. And one of the things that I always love that you say is heal the healers. And it's whenever I heard that, I was like, oh, yeah.
Why does that ignite passion in you, the heal the healers?
Well, I think for me, I realized that I came into the field because, well, first of all, I accidentally came into the field. I promised myself I'd never work in addiction treatment, and I was a little over 20 years sober, and my friend started working at Altamira up in the Bay Area. I lived in San Francisco, and there was something within me that knew I was supposed to be there. As a matter of fact, they rejected my resume saying, you don't have any experience. And I responded with, that's so weird, I know I'm supposed to be there. And my now friend Carolyn calls me and she says, I have to meet you. And so the reason I start with that is I just see so many people coming into the field with great intentions and then just getting in, being on the front lines and getting depleted and burnt out and feeling like, why am I doing this intense work? And so I want to be able to provide a space with some very simple tools to help people reconnect with their passion. And to me, there is nothing greater than being present and watching someone's eyes light up for the first time or for the first time in years. So I just feel like that's it. Yeah.
As you're talking about this, I think about two of the people on our leadership team and the passion that you both have for working with our queer population. And how did you get into the field, Jack?
I mean, I don't want to, I wasn't forced into it. It was kind of an accident. I was working in kitchens during the pandemic. I got laid off. We were the first round of people to be laid off. And I had all this idle time, and with a push from my mom and a push from my past, I decided to pursue becoming a certified alcohol and drug counselor. And after that, it was all just kind of like baptism by fire. And I tell the people I work with, of course, counseling is a big part of what I do, but what I love most and what I've always come back to is case management. I really love the tangible reward of, you didn't have a California state ID, now you have a California state ID. You had a warrant out for your arrest, now you don't have a warrant out for your arrest. The sort of more nebulous, like ethereal treatment goals of resolved trauma. I can understand why there's a lot of burnout around that, because it's like, how do I ever really know, especially if this individual is relapsing or returning to problem behaviors, how do I really know that any tangible progress is made? And I understand how frustrating that can be from the outside.
But even in the work with that, right, it's like these, I think as clinicians, we're kind of in a business of removing barriers, whether they're internal or external barriers to our own growth and prosperity and whatever we want to do in this world. And I think a lot of those barriers are logistical barriers to, gender affirmative care or even medical care or driver's license or court barrier. Like, so it's all this like really comprehensive kind of a matrix, right, that helps a person really engage their unique potential. as a person.
I knew that like when I was getting sober, if I didn't know that like I was being set up for case management, right? Like if I had tooth pain, or if I, wasn't, current on my medication, or, if I knew that like I had to get a job in a few months because I was granted a scholarship, which is how I got sober, which I will eternally be grateful for. And I always knew like, hey, I need to become a productive member of society. I don't know that I would have been able to participate in the therapeutic treatment if that life skill stuff wasn't taken care of.
Yeah, the practical measures that allow therapeutic engagement to be possible. Like medical stabilization allows therapeutic and psychological stabilization to take place.
And TJ, I know you do a lot of work with clinicians that are facilitating all of these things because it can be super, we work in an industry of emotion. And sometimes, as me being a drug addict working in this field, I'm a very sensitive alcoholic. And so I, want to save everybody and like get invested in my clients. And so I know that you talk a lot about, self-care and taking care of ourselves as professionals in the industry.
Yeah, and for me, it's actually something, it's that and it's something much deeper too. And I'm going to quote the wonderful Dolly Parton here, one of my favorite quotes. I'm setting the stage because people will now listen very intently because Dolly said it. She said, it takes a lot of money to look this cheap. And when it comes to clinicians, it takes a lot of work to look like we're not doing anything, right? And so many people come into the field, whether they come in early sobriety or they come in because they have trauma in their family, and they dive in and they think, I want to help people, which ends up being, I want to save people. But if we haven't, I'll put it in the eye, if I haven't done enough of my own healing, then I'm going to be trying to fix people who they appear to be broken to me. And so to be able to facilitate a group and have a client at the end say, I don't know how that went so well, you didn't do anything. That's actually the greatest compliment I could ever receive. And so that's really what I quote unquote, train clinicians to do, which is really about how can I be fully present and available so that the person in front of me or the group of people can access their own inner wisdom and their own healing, because I'm not here to save anyone. I'm here to serve. And how do I serve? I serve by how I view them. And when I started working in the field, the most striking thing to me, other than people coming back to treatment 15, 16, 17 times and us saying, what are you going to do differently this time?
Which punitive.
I mean, that's one thing, but like, are we going to ask ourselves that?
Right.
But the second thing was listening to clients being referred to as broken or damaged. And it was kind of soul crushing for me in a way, because I'm like, I came in sort of through the side door of spirituality, which we could talk about, but I came in asking a question that is so profoundly simple. And that is, what gets created when I look for your infinite potential instead of what's broken about you? And quantum mechanics is showing us that the observer has a profound effect. So that's my greatest passion, because that's true self-care. To be able to do my own work, to be able to do my own healing, so that I'm not trying to fix someone, but I'm here holding space, which is an overused term, but the essence of that is so powerful.
I love that. And before we go into that, can I share my best Dolly Parton quote?
Oh, please, yes.
The bigger the tits, the smaller the waist.
Noted.
I love it. I love it.
We were talking about, this feels very relevant because in the last week, Mel introduced me to this term that I'm going to butcher. What was it? Empathic
distress.
Yeah.
Right. As opposed to like a burnout. Right.
Yeah.
Because there's something very distressing when your empathy has zero guideline or boundary around that, right? And so you're just constantly moving from this place of, I'm going to quote Joan Halifax on this, which is like this pathological altruism, and you don't even know that you're there, where it's all well-meaning, it's all from the place of best intentions, but it's coming out all sideways, because it's coming from the idea of I need to rescue or save as opposed to walk with and serve. So I think those distinctions as a clinician, I'm going to plug that book, is Standing at the Edge, like changed who I am as a clinician in the world, and how, I look at other clinicians as not a place of burnout, but the place you're talking about, right? And you work in treatment, and sometimes the glasses get a little tinted, especially if you're cycling in and out of that place of feeling, there's moral outrage, which is like we're up against systemic pressures and beholden to certain things working in the privatized treatment industry.
Yep.
That is true. But how you navigate that will show up in a room with your client in front of you, and how you see them will be affected if you're not. And it's like the self-care, it's hard in systemic oppression, whether it's, being beholden to treatment, to insurance providers, or even outside of treatment, which is something I think we're all kind of feeling right now. Like, how do I walk through that and not, like you were just talking about, lead with a wound, right?
Well, and what I think is so important about what you're saying is, and this is one of my favorite topics, because I will often hear people say, I'm an empath, so I need to protect myself from the energy of my clients. And my invitation, and I like to be provocative, and I say, what if we don't need boundaries? And I want to be clear what I'm talking about, not professional boundaries. I want to be very clear because, as of late, it's very clear that we need to say that. But I'm talking about the energetic boundary, right? So if I feel depleted, and even going deeper, if I feel broken or I feel damaged, I'm going to see everyone as broken and damaged, including the system.
Yeah.
And of course, there's so much to point to with the system and everything that's happening in the outer world. And then what can I actually do? I can anchor in my essence, and I can be that presence for someone. And when I take that energetic boundary down, there's a connection that gets created that is way beyond a thought I have or an idea I have or even a modality or an intervention.
Or words I'm saying, it is that I think, just in my individual sessions, that is the magic point. It's not what I've said. It's the way that the room feels in that moment because of presence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the magic of that, because we know that 90% of communication is nonverbal.
That's right.
Right. And yet we
90%.
think 85 to 90% is
Wow.
nonverbal. And most people think the rest is body language. But in my experience, it's actually energy. And, we live on the West Coast. We're like, yeah, I can vibe with that. But if you're someone watching or listening right now and you're like, what are you talking about there? We're energetic beings. It's actually science, right? And energy is always aligned. So if I come in thinking I'm broken and I'm trying to fix you because I think you're broken, the client feels that, but only 100% of the time.
And they're going to match that energy, right? This is a we talk about co-regulation.
Yes.
We're also going to regulate with that energy.
That's right.
Right. And I think about it's like an antenna, it's like neuroception, right? And we're perceiving all of this energetic information, and we're making, beliefs and thoughts based on energetic information that's coming into us from the room.
And when we hold the space energetically, the client can move beyond the thoughts, because we can do a lot of work with thoughts, but the deeper work is, what am I actually experiencing right now? And I will be very bold and say something that is so simple, but I think the number one recovery tool is sitting with myself. Right. And that, because addiction is running from the experience of now. So recovery must be about learning how to sit with it. So if I can model that for someone, and I don't have to even process it, and by saying, Paulo, did you notice you didn't run away after sitting with your feelings? We just do it. Right. And you're like, oh, I can do that.
I think about the language of brokenness, not only applying to addicts and alcoholics, but so much about relationships, pop culture. If we think about, is it Jerry Maguire where he says, "You complete me"? Is that it? Something, I don't know. It's Tom Cruise line, I think, to Renee Zellweger.
Some Tom Cruise are over there, yeah.
But that sort of, I lack completion. I lack a wholeness. Therein, and not as an addict or an alcoholic, just as a human, I am incomplete. Therein, I must seek completeness through relationships or outward messaging, therapy, whatever. The language of brokenness is so pervasive, and also so many industries, whether it be clothing or makeup or self-help or whatever, sort of rely on this, on the initial understanding that you are broken or you lack completeness. So I really love this modality of coming in as no, you are whole and you have infinite potential.
That's right. And the foundational principle of conscious recovery is underneath all addictive behavior is an essential self that is whole and perfect. And you're naming it so beautifully, because we come into the world wide open, whole and perfect, these beautiful little beings. We wouldn't look at an infant and say, look at you, little damaged person.
No.
But then we get programmed through society, I was a little gay boy in the 1960s, 70s, growing up in the Midwest, and all the messages I received, and my grandfather, who I loved, who used the N-word like it was just pass me the tea, right? Like so many layers in the way women were treated. And I had an experience of closing my heart, and I started believing in my own brokenness. And as you said so beautifully, then I started looking to the world to try to fix that or assuage that. That's the malady of humanity. That's not unique to addiction. But with addiction, of course, we have these dramatic results when we get addicted to crystal meth or whatever it is. So in some ways, we have the gift of that, collapse.
I think it's so interesting that you bring that up too, because that's where I always feel like my internalized homophobia came from, was from these outward messages about, as a boy, I shouldn't want to play with a Barbie. As a boy, I shouldn't want to love the Spice Girls. As a boy, if you want to be my lover, you got to get with my friends. Okay, sorry. But like, I was told as a kid, I couldn't play with glitter. Right. And so, then as a grown up gay adult man, I would walk into a room and I would say, "Hi, I'm Paulo." Right. And my voice would drop a few octaves and my shoulders would go back a certain kind of way. I would be aware of how, what's funny is even as I watch back these podcasts, I have a limp wrist.
Yeah. Well, it's also interesting because for me, in my experience, this might not be true for everyone, but homophobia started as misogyny.
Yeah.
Don't look like a girl, don't act like a girl, don't
That's
walk
right.
like a girl, don't talk like a girl. And so this trying to act, and then it shows up, I'm going to speak to our fellow gay men, it shows up as like attractedness to hypermasculinity, right? And like bottom shaming. Like there's so many layers that we could go into that, and we've absorbed that. And I didn't realize how much it was running the show until I was in graduate school and literally on the floor in the fetal position sobbing, because I finally got in touch with the depth of it.
I had said something on a podcast that I was a guest on, and I got so much backlash for this comment. But in my experience,
So let me say it again.
Let me say it again. That's the setup. Yeah.
in my experience,
Which is always valid.
I always felt like white, gay, masculine tops were at the top of the gay food chain.
Yes.
And I got a lot of hate and comments on it. So again, I always thought that was how I would have to navigate life so that I could feel accepted.
Right.
And so I would walk into these rooms, and that is the image that I would portray so that I could feel loved.
Yeah, and it's really
And
an
accept it.
out picturing of shame. And that in my own experience, the root causes of addiction are unresolved trauma, spiritual disconnection, and toxic shame. And so shame doesn't heal shame.
No.
And so the pushback is probably someone's wound getting touched and like, how dare you, which we see so often in our culture, but there's something there that's so important to look at.
I think about Gabor Mate draws attention to the term recovery. It's not like newfound, it's recovering a piece of yourself that existed before.
That's right. You're retrieving something. Recovery is retrieval. And I really consider it to be like kind of a soul retrieval, right? Is like, I know that this piece exists, but I need someone maybe to reflect to me that they also know that this exists within me in order for me to even begin to start on a journey of retrieving and recovering, right? It's not something was lost. It's not something was missing. It's that, I consider it to be like mud on the windshield, right? It's just I'm unable to see clearly. Sobriety translates to clarity. And so I need some sobriety in order for me to turn on the wipers and start to get the mud off the windshield so I can see me clearly again.
Well, Mel, you're speaking to something that's so important to me, because when I was 18 months sober, I was suicidal. And I know some of you will recognize this paradigm, but this is what was said to me by countless people. Don't worry about anything but not drinking. Your life's a miracle. Now go help someone else. And I was like, I just told you I want to die.
Right.
And I met this woman who took me on a journey. Her name is Mary Helen. I've dedicated my life's work to her, honestly, who saw something within me that I had lost access to. That it was the retrieval really is from within.
Yeah.
Because I
It's here.
still have this place of preciousness. And she would say to me in her Southern accent, darling, you're so precious. And I would literally feel like I was going to be sick because every particle of my being felt broken.
Yeah.
And so like this idea of only a behavioral approach had worked so well for me for the first 18 months, but I needed something much deeper, and to recognize that there was a whole and complete spiritual being underneath all of this as a starting point. And I want people to have that on day one, so they don't have to be 18
They don't have to
months
go through all
sober.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am so happy you share that, because that's actually like I lead meetings, and that is one thing I'm always sure to touch on, because I had a very similar experience of like checking all the boxes and doing all the things, and like, well, what is happening? And it slowly started happening more and more and more, and then I hit about an 18-month wall where I felt like every bone in my body broke. And I found a sponsor, well, actually he found me, that aligned me with spirituality and the thing I needed the most, right? Because if the injury is a largely spiritual injury, whether it's trauma, relational trauma, like, you know, actually event-driven trauma, like there's something that happens inside a person when they have those experiences that completely almost like it's a shut off. It's not an erasure, but it's like I can't expose this. Everything around me is too dangerous. And when you have one person that sees that inside of you,
That's it.
that is a revolution.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's what we really do. We hold that. And I like to say our jobs can be much easier than we might make them out to be if I realize my only job is to see something within you that you've lost sight of. And there's so many layers, right? Rumi says we're not here to seek for love, but to look at the barriers we put, you know, on top of that. So it's really about unlearning and remembering. And then, oh my gosh, I remember being a 3-year-old and being filled with joy. And I remember being a 7-year-old and being filled with fear.
There's two things that this conversation has brought up for me. One of my favorite things in this CMA literature, which is the program that I got sober in, is when it says welcome home. You know, and when we talk about that piece of recovery and finding ourselves of what we have lost, it's that welcome home piece that like
That home
feels,
is-
because I've been looking for home my entire life. And when I say home, I mean like a place where I can breathe and not feel like it's not okay for me to be in the most authentic version of myself. And the other thing that I want to talk about is I had 90 days sober, and it was in 2006, and I went on my first job interview of my life. I had just turned 18, and I got sober when I was 18. And I walked into a luxury retailer on Michigan Avenue in Chicago. I had maybe 5 teeth in my mouth. I was 100 pounds. All I had done is sold drugs and sex work my entire life. And I walked into this job interview, and this woman looked at me and she said, "Why should I hire you?" And I just started sobbing in this job interview. And I said, "I'm 90 days sober, and I need someone to have more faith in me than I can have in myself."
Wow.
And she hired me. And
Wow.
I left. I started as an entry-level position in that company and left as an executive director of the West Coast. And at 8 years later, and I'd stayed sober and like built my career and like learned everything. And funny enough, it was the cosmetic industry when you brought that up. And selling drugs and selling cosmetics are very similar. You know?
Sure is.
They're both
Sure
drugs.
is. I was going to say, you've got some great life skills with being a sex worker and a drug dealer. Those are the best, right?
Yeah, you give a gift with purchase, and like suddenly you have a big business. You know, it's really easy. But I love the conversation we're talking about is like finding yourself and refining yourself through getting sober. And you have long-term sobriety. You just celebrated
39 years on June 8th. Wow, it's so crazy. Then I have to add 39 plus 20, which was how old I was when I got sober. And that number is not quite as thrilling, but obviously I'm very grateful to be 39 years sober. Yes.
It's so crazy. You got sober young. We all kind of got sober young.
Ish.
Ish.
Young.
And the lives that we lived prior to getting sober and compared to the lives that we have now, these big, beautiful lives of helping others, and you know, we all work programs, and we're all, I think we talked about this in a previous episode, is like, yes, we get the pleasure and the gift of working in treatment and helping others, but we are all active in our own recovery, which I think is really important. How many meetings do you go to a week?
Not enough. No, I mean, it's interesting, like, and I talked to sponsees about this too, like, a relationship with recovery is not like static. I think about when I first got sober this time around in 2018, and I tell sponsees this now as well, or newcomers, like, I have not ever been as sober as I was in my first 30 days of recovery. I was like on fire with the word of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I had such, or at least what I thought was such a close connection with a higher power. And I so desperately wanted my life to be saved through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. I would say after 30 days, everything just sort of is like, trying to remember what those 30 days were like. My relationship with the 12 steps has not been like a flat line, right? My first year, I was really heavily involved. In my second year, I got into a relationship that I wanted to complete me, and my engagement really fell out. And then it was in like my third and fourth year where I was the most heavily engaged I've ever been. And that's when the most things came true for me in my life. Like, I met my husband, I got a job in treatment, I felt like I was building a career, all of these things. And what really changed for me is I was 2 years sober, and I felt broken. I'll make that distinction. I wasn't broken, but I really felt broken. I had spent 2 full years trying to prove to somebody else that I could be an honest person or a trustworthy person or a compassionate or loving person, and hadn't spent any time trying to prove that to myself. And when that relationship ended, I stood at this precipice of not knowing who I was as a sober man. And I saw this woman speak in a meeting, and for 30 minutes she talked about God. And I don't know what came over me, but I was like, that is what I need. That is what has been missing from my program. And I still work with her to this day. She was at my wedding. But that spiritual piece that was really missing from my program, which I love that you talk about this. Spiritual
disconnection.
When I think of spiritual, I think of TJ Woodward. Like, those two things go hand in hand.
Yeah, can you explain? You said you found like a spiritual side door to your entry.
Yeah, what was that?
Absolutely. So when I was probably 3 years sober, 2 or 3 years sober, I started attending like a metaphysical community called Unity. I don't know if you've heard of Unity. In LA, people here know about Agape, right? It's a spiritual community, trans-denominational, new thought, right? Not so much dogmatic, but really about, you know, finding that spirit or that essence within. And at the same time, I started really dabbling in Eastern thought too. Went to India on a trip, went to Thailand on a trip, started doing a lot of chanting and kind of really exploring, like, what does spirituality mean to me? And at some point I came to that spirituality actually is the essence of the spirit of who and what we are. And it might be a little controversial to say, but I don't think spirituality is necessarily about finding a higher power that's outside of us. And I can always go back to, if someone's in 12 step, I can always go back to, well, it's what it says in the big book, actually, that it's only can be found within, ultimately, right? Ultimately. And so to me, spiritual disconnection is about coming into the world. A 3-year-old does everything instinctively that we try to get out of recovery or a spiritual practice. They feel their feelings, they connect well, they're open, they're loving, right? All the things that's innate in the human experience. And so to me, that's the essence of spirituality. And when I disconnected from that and decided I was broken, that is really where the addiction began, because just like you said, once I felt broken, I started seeking outward, and that outward seeking became addictive in so many different ways. And so spiritual connection to me is about reconnecting with the truth of who and what we are, which may or may not involve seeking a higher power or the idea of a God.
Yeah. I'm always like, the two people I have to impress in this world are 7-year-old me and, God willing, 93-year-old me.
Yeah.
Because those are the two most important people to me to impress. That one, the younger one, living in that way. And, you know, yes, fear is necessary, but it doesn't always have to be a guard. And like walking through that maybe with an essence of a loving spirit more than a fearful one has really proven a different path for me in my life. And when I'm 93, I don't want to look back on my life and say, why didn't I take that chance?
Yeah.
Why didn't I love harder? Why, you know, why was I so reserved? Or why didn't I speak louder? Like, those are my two most important people in my recovery that I put in front of my day every day.
I love that, Mel.
I
That
do
is
too.
so cool.
Actually, it's so funny. I want to channel RuPaul right now.
Oh,
what would you say to 7-year-old Mel?
Oh my.
Thank you,
Okay.
RuPaul. Yes. Mel gave us permission to show this
Okay,
photo.
all right. What would I say right now in this moment?
Yeah.
I'm here. I'm here. That right now in this moment, in this day, it is just that I'm here. Because looking outward at what seems to be a very scary world is also activating for little Mel. So little Mel needs to know that we're not going to change anything, fix anything. I'm just here. I'm here just to witness and do whatever you want to do right now, because I need to acknowledge that, and that is a part of my spirituality. Like, you want to go create, you want to go paint, like, and moving with that is a conscious contact for me, and it doesn't necessarily have to come in a meeting. It comes in my wonderful garage space where I paint paintings. It comes in a song. It comes in recovery meetings. It comes in, you know, a divine line of poetry. The heart song. I know. Paulo's like,
My poetic Mel.
yeah, but recovery is this lived experience for me. And it doesn't have to always show up in a step or a meeting or a sponsor call or, you know, in a sponsee call. It shows up in everywhere in my life, but I have to be attuned to it, and I have to have the right vision in front of me. And that comes from 7-year-old and 93-year-old versions of me.
I love it.
Yeah,
I want to
so
go
beautiful.
around. What would you say to 7-year-old Jack?
Oh,
So I would probably say something to the effect of like, the people who support you today are going to continue to support you. That is not going to change no matter what. I think that there was so much fear that the relationships that were most important to me, that being like my mom, my sister, that they would evaporate if I was my authentic self. And they actually only ended up getting stronger. It's like when you're trying to hide a part of yourself, when, you know, 90% of your conscious thought goes into hiding a piece of yourself, your relationships actually aren't very strong. It's like when I wish I could tell my 7-year-old self all of that concerted effort that you are going to put into hiding who you are, or doing what you think is protecting who you are, is actually a huge effing waste of time, and is actually only going to like impede you building a stronger relationship with the people who support you the most. You know?
What would you say to 7-year-old
Is it my turn?
yeah, it is.
You know, it's so interesting that we're choosing the age 7, because I have these 7-year cycles. That 7 was the day, and I can remember it like it was yesterday, that I put a wall around my heart. I actually remember sitting at the dining room table with my mom and my sisters and just feeling a physical sensation of closing. So 7, and then 14 started to drink and use 21, just before 21, getting sober. So 7 is very significant for me. And I would say, and I do say, so I'm going to be clear about this, I do say to my 7-year-old, because it's a conversation that I have on an ongoing basis. When something happens in the world and I feel that 7-year-old want to put the wall up, you know, sometimes we call them coping strategies or defense mechanisms. I call them brilliant strategies.
They're so adaptive.
And the reason I call them brilliant is they literally saved my life. The closing of the heart, the ecstasy and the alcohol and the cocaine. And so coming into recovery and being so shame-based, I kind of was drawn to shame-based recovery in the beginning. You know, you're a piece of shit, sit down and shut up. And I was like, yeah, I can vibe with that. Because that little 7-year-old was like, this is too scary. Too scary to be in this world. So what I do say to my 7-year-old is, you're whole and complete and perfect. You're made exactly the way you were intended to be. You're an infinite being. I love you and I appreciate you.
I'm literally sitting here tearing up, because what I was going to say is, I was going to tell my 7-year-old self is, you're not a piece of shit.
Right.
And that it's okay for you to take up space and to wear glitter, and it is okay for you to accept and love yourself, and to not resent your parents, because they're just doing the best that they can with what they have. And growing up in the South, and I grew up in a, I hate to say this, but I grew up in a racist family. That my dad, you know, grew up in the 40s in Biloxi, Mississippi. You know, I mean, and so growing up in a family where the resentments that I had against my family for not accepting me for being gay, I shot in my arms for years.
Yeah. Well, and that to me is really what we're here to do, is help someone have a moment of vulnerability like you are. And I think it's very convenient that we talk about the South being racist, but it's really, it's not isolated to the South.
You can go 30 minutes east.
Right.
Not even. It was an
We're seeing it on TV every day.
Well, and to be even more honest, we're swimming in it, right? And so like, I get to acknowledge what it was like growing up in that. You know, I grew up in Indiana. That's where the KKK started. Did not start in the South, right? I grew up in that, and I used to just reject it. But to have the vulnerability to say this was part of my formation, that is what I get to unlearn now and hold myself with so much compassion. I was recently working with someone, I have a family member who's in treatment, and the therapist was like, when are you going to hold your mom accountable? And I thought, how interesting. And I think I understand what that meant to them at the time, because this family member was really letting her off the hook for everything. And so I was thinking about when I got sober, I had the perfect childhood. I had the perfect childhood, everyone. Everything was great. And then about 2 years in, I had the absolute most horrific parents. They were horrible and they were abusive. And I wrote the letters of confrontation. And then at about 3 or 4 years sober, I'm like, not only did they do the best they could, but they were just passing down the trauma that was given to them.
That's right. That's that intergenerational, like, legacy burden, right, of trauma. And even like when I'm thinking about, it's similar to, go back to something you said in the beginning that I find relevant right now, is like, we're always looking for adverse childhood experiences. We hear about this in treatment all the time. We hear about the ACEs and like, oh, have people fill out this questionnaire. Oh, you're at higher risk because like of all of this shitstorm you were kind of born into. But we rarely look at the PCEs, the positive childhood experiences, and like focus on that, not just this, right? Because that's where resilience is born, and it's in these positive moments. And I'm going to share kind of a little tea time funny story about Mel. When Mel first got sober, yes, I did a lot of crystal meth. Yes, I did a lot of heroin, so I'm going to preface it. When I first got sober, I remember being in the rehab druggie buggy, and I heard horse whinnies. And I was trying to tell people, like, are there horses around? I'm hearing these horse whinnies. What's happening? And everyone's like, oh, no, you're just coming off the meth. Like, you've lost your mind. But I had one therapist who believed me that I was not, like, you know, a crazy person coming off of crystal meth. And I actually uncovered that I had blocked out so many positive childhood experiences that when I got sober and all this other stuff was being processed through, that adverse childhood experiences, it left room for these positive childhood experiences, which were horse driven. And like I used to love to ride and all that as a kid, that came through, but had been tamped down because there was so much focus on the, the bad parts of things or the negative experiences that I had well forgotten about these moments and intervals and glimpses of beautiful, wonderful, positive experiences that accentuated and mirrored my spirit.
Wow, it's so interesting, Mel, because my mother almost died a few weeks ago, and we went to her bedside and thought it was happening, and she ended up pulling through and rebounding like dramatically and unexpectedly. But as we were there together, I'm like, I have so much peace with this human, so much love for this human. And I remember one time, maybe 10 years ago, she's like, "Can we sit down and talk? I know I did a lot of things that caused harm." And I was able to say to her, "And you also did a lot of things to make me feel loved." Being a little gay boy, I remember like running down the hallway with a bra on, yelling, "Bigger boobies, mommy, bigger boobies." And she's like, "Okay, here's more Kleenex. Are you sure you don't have enough?" Like she was like totally accepting of that. And I have friends who that was not their experience. Just like I grew up in a church that was totally accepting, which is wild for that time. So like, I agree with you. It's like to realize that they're both important to focus on.
They are, right? Because if we're talking about you are beautiful, perfect, and whole, that includes all of those aspects of wholeness.
When I was doing my inventory and my recovery work, it was hard for me to write down my resentments towards my parents because I felt like if I wrote them down, then they were true. And I just was so ready to let it all go before acknowledging it. And then when my mom passed away, we had zero unfinished business. And it was, I am so grateful that that I was able to do the work before my mom passed away, because if I hadn't, I don't know that I would be here.
Right.
Yeah. I did the, kind of by chance, ended up doing, I think it's called Hello Again, which is Gabor and Daniel Mate's workshop. I did it like with only 14 other people. It was really surreal. There's a documentary that I'm a part of somewhere that I haven't seen.
Oh, I need the reel.
With my mom, but there was, my mom and I did it together.
Wow.
And my mom is like my BFF. I love my mom, and they were kind of like, "Why are you here?" But there was a lot of conversation because there were people who were there with really intense, tangible traumas, either women who have lost their children, children who felt their parent had denied their sexual abuse was real. And my mom and I were there like, "Hey, we're just here," and but there was a lot of conversation around how do I honor my mother and my father. There was a woman there who was obviously a practicing Christian, and she kept coming back to this concept of like, honor thy mother and thy father. That's a commandment that's a huge tenet of my faith. And Gabor Mate brought it back to honoring thy mother and thy father doesn't have to mean maintaining a relationship or stifling your feelings to cater to the egos of your parents. But I think it's much more appealing to what you're talking about. And there were these moments where you taught me that I was extremely lovable. There were these moments where you afforded me positive experiences. How do I continue to cultivate that in myself, that feeling of love, that feeling of worthiness? That is honoring your mother and your father, not going to Thanksgiving even though you're going to be miserable.
Right.
And
Right. What are you bringing literally to the table?
You talk about that a lot.
Yeah.
As LGBTQ folks, which all of us here are, I know that sometimes family dynamics can be challenging. And I'm just so grateful that we're all here as chosen family and professionals in the industry and working with the queer community. And TJ, I wanted to highlight your new program that you just started and that you're part of in San Diego and that you're opening.
Yeah, thank you.
what is
Element
it?
Q Healing Center. I'm partnering with the folks at Monima Behavioral Health. They're incredible in San Diego. They've had a women's trauma program for about 18 months, and I've worked with them for many years when they were at a different program, and some of the most solid people doing true trauma healing work. And I approached them. Actually, it was at West Coast Symposium last year. I approached Nicole and said, when is someone going to do this for men and or for LGBTQ folks? And she said, let's talk about that. And it was midnight, only because we were at this event until 11:30. She texted me, I can't stop thinking about this. Let's talk. So I'm so grateful to be partnering with them. They're so solid. It's mental health, PHP, IOP. And you know, it's wild. It's the first LGBTQ program in San Diego County.
I believe that.
Yeah. So we're incredibly grateful to have recently opened it.
I love it. Well,
That's awesome.
congratulations.
I'm so excited.
Thank
for
you.
And, we love supporting LGBTQ affirming programs. There's not enough of us. And, our community is, God, this is going to sound shitty, but it is. We're a political pawn in the media right now. And so what I wanted to say is that we are grateful that sorry, let me go back a second.
You're fine.
We are, sorry.
It's good.
We are so excited for your grand opening that you had a few weeks ago. And we're just, all these programs that are working with the LGBT community, there aren't enough of us, but we got to stick together. And so, and I'm just so grateful that you've spent some time to come kick it with us on the No Matter What Club. And we just wrapped Pride Month, and now we're gonna, we had a beautiful conversation today about healing and spirituality and working in the industry and taking care of ourselves and, saying that we aren't broken individuals. And I loved our conversation today.
Me too. And I feel like we just got started. So I think we could do this for like
Right.
5
Right,
hours.
same.
So you never know. It could be a marathon.
Right? Oh my
So
gosh.
anyway, did I just say anyway? I didn't mean that in a dismissive way. I meant that in my brain was cycling to what am I going to say next? And so what I'm going to say is please like and subscribe. Check out the No Matter What Club on all streaming platforms. And we'll see you next week on the No Matter What Club.